The first Operation Babylift flight left Saigon at 4:30 local time.
We were about 12-15 minutes into our flight when, in the middle of we just finished the checklist, and unbeknownst to us, due to uneven loading of blocks, the ramp failed on the rear of the airplane. Now, when that ramp failed, it caused the locks all the way around the rear opening to break away. And when that rear pressure door, which had 93 tons of pressure on it at the moment at 23,000 feet, well, that door exited very quickly.
The big door cut through the hydraulic cables, and pink hydraulic fluid gushed out. The door sliced off part of the tail.
When it went through the tail of the airplane, it took with it, unfortunately, all my flight controls to the tail. Now, the good news is I was left with 2 of my 4 hydraulic systems, and that at least left power to the surfaces so that I didn't gain all the aerodynamic characteristics of a rock. But with no flight control cables, then I couldn't change my airspeed.
Regina Arney was at the back on the upper deck.
I came up here to get some medication, and I was just closing the kit up and pushing it back, and I was kneeling on this grate when we experienced a loud explosion, and then the cabin misted and fogged. When the fog cleared and I looked down through the gate where I was kneeling, I could see that the ramp was gone and the jagged edge of the floor from the cargo compartment, and there was pink fluid all over the floor. One of the loadmasters evidently had followed me up the ladder, and the force of the rapid decompression tore out the ladder, so he was hanging by his hand, just holding on to the top part of this gate, dangling over the South China Sea. So we needed to get him up over the ladder and lay him on the floor and bring him into this part of the aircraft.
The control cables were dangling out of the back of the airplane like spaghetti. Well, that confirmed why I could do nothing to control my speed. So if I added power, I kind of went up, and if I took off power, I kind of went down. But that was a very delicate balancing act, and so we did that all the way back to Saigon.
The outskirts of Saigon, already under fire, were now threatened by a fully loaded aircraft out of control.
I got to about 200 feet off the ground. I said, well, there's no point in going in as a powered arrow. So I yanked the throttles to idle, and about that time you come into ground effect. Now, ground effect is when you get within about 1 wing's span from the ground, you get a cushioning of air, and that further stopped my descent, so that when I touched down, except for the fact that I was going about 3 times too fast, the rate of descent was a normal landing descent.
We were flying over the city, and we saw the C-5 coming back in. And obviously at that time we did not know that it was the same C-5. And we kind of started drifting over back toward the airbase because we wanted to watch it land. And we were quite a ways from it. We were a good probably 4 or 5 miles away, 3 miles away from it. And we saw the planes go in on this approach, which looks normal, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared.
But when I touched down the first time, I thought, well, hey, this is going to work. I'm going to, quote, belly it in on the gear, and we'll come to a stop, and they'll come out and get us. And the next thing I knew, I was airborne again. And we went some distance again, not too high, but flew over the Saigon River.
The escape slides in the emergency exits started to inflate, and had they continued to inflate, they would have probably crushed everybody around them. One of the loadmasters had a little pocket knife in his flight suit, and he got up and took his pocket knife and slashed the slides so that they would stop inflating.
Now the second time when we touched down, we don't have gear wheels anymore. We've got big spikes sticking down, and when we did that, then that was a much harsher condition for the airplane, and when it did that, that caused the cargo compartment to break apart.
It just collapsed the bottom, you know, so everyone downstairs was killed. But we did have quite a few survivors upstairs.
We hit the ground again, a much more forceful impact with the ground than the first one. And this particular loadmaster, he became airborne, sort of like a missile within the troop compartment. And as he went down the aisle, there was a young girl who was accompanying the orphans back who had her ear cleanly cut off. And he ended up crashing into the wall, and he died several days later.
The top part, where the passengers and the crew were, it just broke completely apart from the airplane. And it almost did like a complete 180 in the air and then hit and slid. But at that point, the people upstairs, that part didn't break up. There were other sections broke up.
I put my head down because I didn't want something to you know, decapitate me that way. Said goodbye to my wife, and the next thing I knew, somebody yelled fire. We'd stopped. I reached over and, you know, undid my seatbelt. I was upside down, so I, you know, fell out, and swung around, opened my crew window, which is normally 33 feet off the ground, and stepped out into the rice paddy.
I was in my office, and my executive officer came in and said, "Boss," he said, we got a real problem." I said, "What's that?" He says, "The C-5 that took the orphans has just crashed." And I ran to the window and looked, and I could see the smoke coming up from the area. Although it wasn't on the air base per se, it was on the approach path.
Well, I went straight back to the nursery where I worked, and one of the child care workers told me that there had been a phone call from the airport, and she was totally hysterical, and I could not make out what had happened. I just didn't know, and maybe I thought there might have been a crash, but I don't think I was thinking that. I think I was just blocking out that might have been a possibility. And so I got in a taxi and went straight back to the airport and found that that's what had happened.
But I didn't have a clue that it was the orphan crash until we actually sat down at the crash site, which was just a couple of minutes later. It was horrible. Never seen anything like it in my life. The one major element of the airplane was still burning, and it kind of went out. There was no really what you might call an explosion, but there was a lot of fire. The grass all around was burning and stuff like that. And our main concern at that time was just get everybody and get them on the helicopters, the survivors, and get them out of there.
I looked back along the side of the airplane. All I saw was the fire burning 200-300 yards away, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's the airplane. And as I walked around to the broken off flight deck, I realized that, oh no, indeed not. When the airplane had landed the second time and broke apart, it broke into, apparently, its construction component parts. The tail fell off and stayed where it was. The troop compartment made a little skid landing like a toboggan, and it was you know, just how fortuitous can you be? But there are 73 seats up there, and they were all filled with 2 kids each, and the adults were braced between the seats. And so the only kids who died from the crash upstairs in the troop compartment were 2 that I was told had bags of gold around their neck, and the cord had strangled them. But other than that, the kids were just fine. In fact, I was told some of them had to be awakened to be taken off the airplane.
I was making a trip back to the troop compartment area when I saw a little one crawling around, because some of the children had managed to get out of their seats, and they were crawling around inside the troop compartment. And one of them was crawling outside of the aircraft, was on a kind of a jagged edge of the wall of the aircraft that was sticking out, and I was afraid he was going to fall into the rice paddies. If he fell in, he would have drowned in the mud. So I walked over to pick him up, and I reached down and grabbed him by the seat of his pants, because that was the closest thing to me to reach. And when I tried to stand up straight, I could not do it. And I don't remember anything from that point on until I was being put in the helicopter.
Regina Arney suffered badly broken bones in her foot and back, but fully recovered. For many others, there was no recovery. It's thought 49 adults were killed, including 11 members of the aircrew and 78 Vietnamese orphans.
It just became very horrible. You walk around and you find a baby here laying in the bushes, or a body part here, or an airplane crash is so traumatic. What it does to the human body, as far as a trauma wound, is just unreal. And I recall one of the crew members, we got his body, and he was laying there, and there wasn't a scratch on him. I mean, literally not a scratch on him. But he was very obviously dead. When I reached down to pick him up, Roger and I reached down to pick him up, it was like he was picking up a bag of marbles, so apparently every bone in his body had been broken.
All I remember seeing was piles of burning wreckage. And the image that I will never forget is of the bodies being piled into little heaps. The way you've seen air crashes before where people's belongings are piled into heaps. Well, these were little children being piled in, maimed, burnt children being piled into heaps.
The nurses left behind wept for their babies.
Well, it was just totally devastating. It was like, it was like your heart was being cut out, and yet you had to function. You felt like just collapsing and shrieking, and it was something you almost couldn't take in, but you had to start doing the best you could and start functioning and take care of these children.
We waited, I think, maybe about 3 hours when they brought some of the children back to us. It was as if I was somewhere else, just like a robot. And we were so busy doing things for them that we had to do that you had no time to really even cry or talk or anything like that. You were so busy getting the children ready because they said that they were well enough to go for the next plane the next day.
The tragedy had touched the toughest nerves.
I went back over to the mortuary and we started bagging and tagging. That was a scene out of Dante's Inferno. I mean, it was horrible. First of all, they had them in a great big room, and it was unrefrigerated. Of course, you know what the heat is like in Saigon. Our medics and the graves registration people handled it okay. I couldn't. I had to go back outside.
The accident stopped the airlift only for a day. More than 2,000 children were saved. For the surviving crew of the Galaxy, there was the appalling nightmare of greater carnage.
Had I actually made the runway as I had intended, at the speed I was going, I would have been on the runway for just a few seconds. And if I couldn't stop it, and I was once again going 3 times too fast, I would have been downtown Saigon and would have wiped out, many, many more people. So once again, fate was on our side.
I was never exposed to such hardship and to such sorrow. And I said this to myself, Lord, why did you take me off that plane to save my life? That was the first thing that came into my heart.
It's very hard to cope with the realization that only an hour before you'd seen these children laughing, expectant little faces. And you were now looking at the same aircraft, or what was left of the aircraft, and what was left of those children. Now, you don't, at the time, as a newsman, stand and ponder on the morality, the sadness, and you don't grieve about it. I think it's only in later years do you start to feel odd and perhaps guilty and perhaps slightly ashamed of being part and parcel of it all. But that was the war.